Today, you'll hear a story that seems impossible to believe. Yusuf al-Karim, a young Palestinian raised amidst hatred and war, swore from a young age that he would never listen to a Christian. For him, Jesus was the enemy, and any follower of his, a traitor. But everything changes when Yusuf crosses the ocean and ends up at a university in California. There, consumed by pride and anger, he decides to publicly challenge Charlie Kirk, the Christian debater watched by millions. He takes the stage ready to humiliate, but ends up being disarmed by a response that will haunt his soul. What happens next is unbelievable. A sequence of events that will take him from confrontation to faith, from darkness to light. And to start, check if you're already subscribed, like the video, and tell me where you're watching from, because this story is going to move you.
I grew up in Ramallah, a place where the air felt heavy, and fear was part of the daily routine, for as long as I can remember. The sound of sirens, distant shouts, and the echo of prayers mingled with the noise of reinforced walls. It was the sound of my childhood. My father, a deeply respected man, led the prayers in the neighborhood. He was admired and feared at the same time, and sincerely believed that our faith was a fortress that needed to be defended from all the infidels. I grew up hearing that Christians were our enemies, that they had corrupted the divine message, and that the world would only have peace when they were silenced. I was just a child, but those words became part of me like a tattoo on my soul. Over time, I learned to recite phrases I didn't even fully understand. I remember repeating the verses my father taught me, feeling proud when I saw his approving look. It was as if, by pronouncing those words, I became more faithful. But inside, something always hurt. I didn't understand why faith had to be accompanied by so much anger. Still, I silenced my heart and followed the path expected of me. At school, I was the disciplined student, but rebellious against any teacher who dared mention Christianity. When I saw a classmate with a small crucifix around his neck, I felt an anger I couldn't explain. They are the problem, I thought. They destroyed everything. Time passed, and the curious boy gave way to the militant young man. The city seemed like a constant battlefield, and faith, an armor against fear. That's what I believed. When I turned 18, I received news that would change my life. I had gotten a scholarship to the United States. For many, it was a dream. For me, a mission. My father embraced me before the trip and said, "Take the truth of our people to the world. Show them what they did to us." Those words became my banner. I would leave for the West, not just as a student, but as someone willing to defend my beliefs with all my might. Upon arriving at California, I was impressed. Everything was different. The freedom, the way people spoke, even the way they smiled without fear. But, amidst that apparent peace, I felt a constant unease. It was as if American soil were enemy territory, and I was there to resist. I entered college, political science, and within a few weeks he was known to everyone. The fiery Palestinian, they called him. He organized debates, protests, and published texts criticizing Christianity as if it were a disease of the West. I believed I was doing something great. When I saw Christian students praying in the cafeteria, I subtly provoked them with irony. I wore t-shirts with slogans mocking their faith and felt powerful when I saw discomfort on their faces. Outwardly, I was the epitome of conviction. Inside, there was an emptiness that grew each day. At night, when the dormitory lights went out, I felt something strange, as if everything I stood for was a wall built to hide an abyss. I began to realize that no matter how much I shouted, peace wouldn't come. And worse, the more I attacked, the more unhappy I became. I said I was fighting for the truth, but I no longer knew what the truth really was. Even so, I continued. Pride wouldn't let me stop. It was during this period that I first heard the name. Charlie Kirk. Someone mentioned that he would be coming to the university for a debate on religious freedom. For me, it was like a personal challenge. That name sounded provocative. I had seen videos of him online and hated his calmness. He spoke about faith, about Jesus, about the right to believe. And he did so with a serenity that deeply irritated me. This man is the symbol of what I fight against, I thought. I need to expose his hypocrisy. I spent days studying his debates, memorizing arguments, preparing verbal traps. I wanted to humiliate him publicly, to show that his faith was weak in the face of my reason. That week, the entire campus was talking about the event. And I, full of confidence, signed up to ask questions during the lecture. When night fell, the auditorium was packed. There were students from everywhere, cameras, reporters. I remember my heart racing and my hands sweating. I stood up and walked to the microphone. Silence fell. Charlie was on stage, smiling, holding a glass of water, ready to answer. My voice echoed through the hall. I asked provocative questions, insinuated that Christianity was a Western invention to dominate peoples, spoke about wars and injustices. People held their breath. I expected to see him react with anger, but he just looked at me calmly and replied, "Jesus taught us to love even those who hate us. And that's what I wish for you today." Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. "Love your enemies," he repeated. For a moment, everything was silent. I felt exposed. He didn't attack me. He didn't try to defend himself. He only spoke of a love that, until that moment, I had never known. I left the auditorium with my face burning, humiliated and confused. It wasn't the ending I expected. In the following days I tried to erase that memory, but his voice echoed within me. It wasn't just any phrase. It was something that pierced my heart and made me question everything I believed. Love your enemies. I, who had spent my entire life hating, didn't know what to do with those words. Then something even more devastating happened. I received a call from my brother, in tears. His voice trembled. "Yusuf, Dad. He's gone." My father had died in a terrorist attack. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. The pain hit me so hard I could barely hold the phone. I ran to my room and fell to my knees. Tears streamed down my face and the anger returned with them. "Why, God? Why?" I cried out. I no longer knew who I was addressing. The God I had learned to fear seemed distant, cold, silent. And for the first time I felt completely alone. I stood there for hours, in silence. Childhood memories, my father's sermons, his fiery speeches, it all began to lose its meaning. And in the midst of that confusion, something inside me broke. It was then, without planning, that I whispered something I never thought I would say. "If the God of Christians is real, show me." Those were the most sincere words that have ever come out of my mouth. There was no more pride, no more conviction. Only pain and a request that would change everything. That night, while trying to sleep, I was overcome by a strange sensation. My body seemed to float, and suddenly I was in a completely different place. Desert. The hot wind whipped against my face, and the sand cut my feet. I looked around. There was nothing. No shadows. No voices. Only silence and thirst. The sunlight burned so intensely I could barely see. I walked for what seemed like an eternity, until, in the distance, I saw a figure approaching. He was a man, dressed in white. His face was serene, and each step he took seemed to silence the wind. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. When he came close, he extended his hand and said, in a soft but powerful voice, "I am the way you seek." At that moment, everything stopped. I didn't know who he was, but something inside me told me I knew him. When I looked into his eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. A vivid light, so intense it made my heart race. I tried to recoil, but I couldn't. It was as if he saw me completely. Not the militant, not the devoted son, but the broken man I truly was. Suddenly, a peace came over me. A peace that didn't come from my mind, but from my soul. Tears began to fall, and I felt a warmth spread throughout my body. It was as if an old wound had been touched and healed at the same time. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The room was dark, but I felt a different kind of light. I touched my face. There were still tears. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, a hallucination caused by stress. But the more I tried to forget, the more that voice returned to my mind. "I am the way you seek." In the following days, something in me changed. The same words that had once filled me with anger now seemed empty. I began to avoid debates, to go out less. Sometimes I would wander aimlessly around campus, feeling a lump in my throat. I didn't understand what was happening to me, But I knew I wasn't the same man who had stepped onto the microphone that night. It was as if a part of me had awakened, and another was dying. The arrogance that protected me began to dissolve, and in its place, something new grew. Something I didn't yet know how to name, but which made me cry for no reason. And although I didn't understand, something told me that this was only the beginning. I remember that day as if time had stood still. The sun was high, the campus was full, and I walked between the buildings with my head full of thoughts. For weeks, the dream about that man dressed in white hadn't left my mind. I tried to follow my routine, to pretend everything was fine. But something inside me was changing. I couldn't hate like before anymore. Every time I saw someone with a crucifix around their neck, instead of contempt, I felt curiosity. But at the same time, a deep pain grew inside me, a mixture of guilt and confusion. I felt torn between two worlds, the old and the new. It was in the midst of this turmoil that it happened. I was climbing the main staircase of the university building when a sharp pain shot through my chest. It was as if an invisible hand had grabbed me from the inside. Everything around me began to spin. The sound of voices, footsteps, laughter. Everything disappeared. I felt my body weaken, and before I knew it, I fell to the ground. I only remember hearing distant shouts, hurried footsteps, and someone calling for help. The pain was unbearable, as if my own heart was being crushed. Then, everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, the bright white lights of the hospital blinded me. Tubes, monitors, incessant beeping. I was intubated, breathing heavily, my body immobile. I saw doctors' faces passing by, heard fragments of conversations. Severe cardiac obstruction, critical situation, he may not survive. Those words echoed like thunder inside my head. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. It was like being trapped inside my own body. As I struggled to understand what was happening, something different occurred. Among the unfamiliar faces, I saw a woman approach. She was wearing a nurse's uniform, but there was something in her gaze that made me feel peace. Her name tag read, Grace. She stopped beside my bed, looked at the equipment, and then placed her hand on my arm. I felt a gentle warmth, a calming presence. She didn't speak at first. She just closed her eyes and began to pray silently. I couldn't hear the words, but I felt their weight. It was as if each syllable pierced the walls of my fear. Tears began to stream down my face without me knowing why. I couldn't move, but something was happening inside. I remembered my prayer. If the God of the Christians is real, show him to me. And in that moment, caught between life and death, I realized that he was listening to me. The following hours were a blur. I felt pain, cold, heat, and then nothing. Until suddenly, I heard agitated voices in the room. One of the doctors exclaimed, surprised, "That's impossible. The blockage has disappeared." Another replied, "The tests don't lie. It was there just a few hours ago. Now it's clear." That didn't make sense to them, but to me, it made perfect sense. When I finally regained full consciousness, Grace was there again. She smiled and said with a sweetness I will never forget, "Jesus has given you a new chance." I couldn't hold back the tears. I cried like a child. It wasn't just emotion, it was liberation. Something heavy and dark inside me had been ripped away. I knew, deep in my soul, that this was the sign I had asked for. God had answered me. The following days were spent in physical, and above all, emotional recovery. Each beat of my heart seemed like a vivid reminder that I was no longer alone. And for the first time in many years, I wanted to live. Not for a cause, not for pride, but out of gratitude. When I was discharged, I returned to campus, but the world seemed different. The same trees, the same paths, the same faces, and yet everything was different. It was as if I were seeing everything for the first time. I looked at the sky and felt a constant presence, something I had previously ignored. And then I decided I needed to understand what had happened. I began searching for answers. I spent hours watching Charlie Kirk's debates and lectures. His words, which had previously irritated me, now seemed to reveal something I had always wanted to know. I wrote down every verse he quoted, every phrase about faith, freedom, and forgiveness. And one night, I made the boldest decision of my life. I went into a bookstore and bought a New Testament. I carried the book hidden in my coat, as if it were a dangerous secret. In the dormitory, I waited for my roommate to leave so I could open it. The first few pages confused me, but as I read, something began to change. When I reached the Sermon on the Mount, my hands trembled. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. It was the same phrase Charlie had quoted. I couldn't stop crying. It was as if those words were written directly for me. In the following days, I read and reread it. What had previously seemed like a distant story now sounded like a voice speaking to me. And each time I read the name Jesus, my heart tightened. I knew he was calling me. But the journey of faith rarely begins without resistance. I told a close Muslim friend about the readings. I expected understanding, perhaps even a dialogue. But his expression changed instantly. "You're playing with fire," he said. "This is betrayal." Within hours, the news had spread. I was expelled from the study group I had founded. I received messages of contempt, accusations, veiled threats. I tried to argue, to say that I was just trying to understand, but no one wanted to listen. I started walking alone on campus. Some looked away when I passed. Others whispered. I felt the weight of rejection, but at the same time, there was peace. It was a strange feeling, as if, despite the pain, I was finally on the right path. One night, I received a call from my mother. Her voice was cold, distant. "Is what they're saying true?" she asked. I hesitated, but I couldn't lie. "Yes, Mom. I'm reading the Bible." There was silence on the other end. A silence that felt like an open wound. "You dishonored your father," she said before hanging up. That click on the phone was like a cut. I stared blankly, feeling my heart shatter. But even amidst all that pain, I felt something new. Hope. I prayed, still timidly, unsure if I was doing it right. I spoke to God as one speaks to someone unseen, but who knows is there. Sometimes my prayers were simple. Show me what to do. Other times I just cried silently. The nights grew long. There were times when I thought about giving up, about returning to the old safety of familiar beliefs. But something inside me wouldn't allow it. It was like a flame, small, but inextinguishable. And every time I felt afraid, I remembered what Grace had said. Jesus has given you a new chance. I started going to the library at night, searching for books about Christianity, hiding them among volumes of philosophy and history. The more I read, the more I understood that it wasn't about a religion, it was about a relationship. I was beginning to understand what grace meant. One day, sitting under a tree on campus, I realized something that changed my perspective. The same place where I once preached hatred was now the setting for my transformation. It was symbolic, almost poetic. I, who once used words to attack, now used silence to listen. But the journey was far from easy. Some former colleagues started following me on social media just to attack me. Anonymous messages arrived every night. Traitor. Apostate. You deserve what comes your way. I read each one, and instead of anger, felt sadness. Because now I understood what it was like to live blind. And I saw in them the reflection of what I once was. Fear still existed, but faith was beginning to grow faster. I felt the presence of something greater guiding me, something that no threat could silence. In moments of solitude, I remembered Grace's hand on my arm, the peace that enveloped me in that hospital bed, and the words that echoed like a calling. I am the way you seek. That's when I realized everything was connected. The dream, the pain, the breakdown, the healing. Nothing was by chance. God had even used suffering to reach me. And even without understanding everything, I knew I was being led to something greater. I continued praying silently every night. Sometimes I asked for strength. Other times, I simply gave thanks for being alive. And the more I prayed, the more certain I felt that the fire within me, that flame that refused to go out, was the Spirit itself calling me to continue. I didn't know what would come next. The world still looked at me with suspicion, and my family still rejected me. But, for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. Because now I knew. True faith begins when everything around you crumbles. And yet, you continue to believe. And it was at this point that my journey began to take a new turn. A path I never imagined I would follow. But one that was about to lead me to a decisive moment. one that would change everything once again. 2 months had passed since the day I left the hospital. My body had recovered, but my soul was still fighting silent battles. I continued reading the New Testament, noting verses, trying to understand what God wanted from me. Each page seemed to rebuild me, piece by piece, as if someone were patiently and tenderly restoring an ancient ruin. I knew I was no longer the same man. Yet, inside me, fear insisted on whispering, "What if all this costs too much?" That's when the unexpected happened. A message from the university administration appeared in my inbox. Charlie Kirk would be returning to campus. Another debate, another packed auditorium, another stage. The same chance, but a completely different meaning. I read and reread the invitation several times. My heart raced. I could almost hear my own breath echoing in the silence of the room. This time, I wouldn't be the opponent. I would be the living testimony of what God had done. For a moment I imagined the scene. The same stage where I had spat words of contempt, now being the place where I would declare what had happened to me. The idea thrilled me, but it also terrified me. I knew what it meant. I knew who might be watching. I knew the risk. That night, as I walked across campus, memories of the past came rushing back like a whirlwind. The faces of my former classmates, the speeches I had given, the times I had laughed at Christians, it all came flooding back. It was as if the devil were whispering in my ear, "You don't belong with them. Stay silent. No one will protect you." I sat on a bench and looked at the sky. The moon was covered by clouds and the cold wind cut my face. And it was there that I whispered, "Lord, what do you want me to do?" The silence was profound, but within me a phrase echoed with supernatural clarity. "Do not be ashamed of me." My whole body trembled. It was as if I were hearing that voice again. The same one from the dream, the same one that said, "I am the way you seek." The next morning, the fear came even stronger. When I opened my phone, I saw a notification. A message from an unknown number. "If you go up on that stage, you'll pay for it." My blood ran cold. I read the sentence several times. The sender didn't need to identify themselves. I knew who I was. They were the same colleagues who once called me brother, the same ones who now called me a traitor. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the phone fall onto the table. My heart was pounding. I knew it wasn't an empty threat. Those people took their beliefs to extremes, and I was now the symbol of what they despised. Doubt began to gnaw at me. What if I stay silent? What if I simply don't go? I spent the whole day torn. Part of me wanted to disappear, to pretend nothing had happened. The other part, the one born from the encounter with Jesus, burned like fire. It was as if the Spirit were saying to me, "You asked me for a sign. Now I ask you for courage." When the sun set, I knelt on the floor of my room. Tears came uncontrollably. I wasn't praying for protection. I was praying for strength. I said, "Lord, if it is your will, use me, even if I have to face my fear." On the morning of the event, the campus was packed. Cars parking, students chatting, cameras positioned. The same energy I remembered from the first debate. Only this time my role was different. I felt my hands sweating. With each step I took, I seemed to hear the echo of the past haunting me. "You hated that man. You defied him. Now you're going to expose yourself?" The auditorium was full. The lights were intense. I stood among the crowd, watching Charlie on stage. He spoke calmly, as always. His words about faith and freedom seemed even more vivid. In the middle of his speech, a university coordinator approached me and whispered, "You're going up, right? Are you ready?" I hesitated. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. I looked at the audience, hundreds of attentive, unfamiliar faces. And then I remembered the words, "Do not be ashamed of me." I stood up. The walk to the stage seemed endless. Each step echoed like thunder. The microphone was in front of me, the same kind of microphone I'd used months before to attack. I grabbed it with both hands. The hall fell silent. Charlie stopped talking and looked at me with a slight smile. He remembered me. I swallowed hard. My voice faltered at first. But then, something took hold of me. The last time I was here, I took a deep breath. I hated this man. I saw him as the enemy. I thought he represented everything that was wrong with the world. But today, I am here to give thanks. Because the God he follows saved me. The silence was total. For a second, I thought no one had understood. But then, I saw teary eyes. I saw people standing up, moved. Charlie looked at me intently, stepped off the stage, and walked towards me. When he hugged me, the audience began to applaud. It wasn't just applause. It was something spiritual. I felt that in that hug, a battle was being won. I cried. I cried like someone who finally understands the purpose of pain. I felt the weight of the past being ripped away, and in its place, an indescribable lightness. For the first time, I felt what it truly meant to be free. After the event, the video of my speech spread rapidly. I wasn't expecting any of that. Within a few hours, messages started arriving from young people in the Middle East. Some in Arabic, others in English, but all with the same tone. Your story gave me courage. I also began to dream about him. Now I want to get to know this Jesus. Each message was a spark of hope. I realized that the testimony that began with pain was transforming into life for others. I was no longer afraid, because I understood that God's purpose is always greater than our comfort. But the true transformation didn't come solely from that public moment. It came later, in silence, in everyday life. Learning to live the new faith was like relearning to breathe. Everything was new, and every detail, proof that God was guiding me. I started participating in Christian groups at university. At first, I remained silent, just observing. The prayers moved me. The way those people spoke to God so naturally enchanted me. It was like talking to a friend. I realized that the Christian faith was not a prison of rules, but a liberation from guilt. One day, one of the group leaders handed me a leather-bound Bible and said, "This is your new journey." I looked at the book and, for the first time, felt like I belonged to something real. I spent entire nights reading and underlining passages. I wrote questions in the margins, made notes. It was like a diary of my new life. Mornings began to take on a different meaning. I would wake up early, put on some soft instrumental music, and sit by the window with my Bible open. The sun shining through the curtains seemed to speak to me. I prayed for my mother, for my brother, for the friends who hated me. I would say, "Lord, touch their hearts as you touched mine." I still felt pain from the distance, but it was no longer bitter. It was a pain mixed with hope. I started helping out at a community center for refugees. There, I met broken people, just as I once was. Men who had fled war, women who had lost everything. And every time I heard a story, I remembered how much God had rescued me from destruction. I began to speak, timidly at first, about what I had experienced. And I realized that each testimony I shared ignited a spark in someone. One of the most striking moments was when a young Syrian man told me, "I also learned to hate Christians. But after seeing what you said in the video, I started reading about Jesus." He cried, and I cried with him. In that instant, I understood that God not only saved me, He was using me to reach others. Today, I continue to live in the United States. I have a small channel where I share messages about faith, forgiveness, and reconciliation between peoples. I am not a pastor or preacher. I am simply someone who has experienced grace and wants to share it with the world. Each video I publish is a seed. Some fall on hard ground, others flourish, but I keep planting. With each recording, I remember where I came from. The boy who grew up between walls believing that faith was war. The student who challenged Charlie Kirk. And the man who, upon collapsing in a hospital bed, heard the name of Jesus echo in his soul. Now, I carry a Bible marked with notes and tears. Every morning before leaving, I place my hand on it and pray, "Lord, may your love always remind me of who I was and who I have become." My family still hasn't completely forgiven me. My mother rarely answers my calls. Sometimes she just listens and stays silent. But even so, I pray for her every day, because I believe that one day, she too will see the same light that I saw. Today, when I walk through the campus where it all began, I feel a different kind of peace. Every tree, every classroom, Every corner of that place carries a memory of the transformation God made in me. And when someone asks me why I believe so much, I smile and say, because the same Jesus who met me in the desert can also meet you wherever you are. This is my truth. Not a theory, not an imposed religion, but a lived experience. And I know there are still chapters of this story that God is writing, one day at a time, until everything is complete.
And now that you've heard this whole story, pause for a moment and breathe. What we have just witnessed is not just the testimony of a man whose life has changed. It is proof that God's love can cross any boundary, even the hardest heart. Yusuf al-Karim emerged from the shadows of hatred, faced fear, rejection, and isolation, but found something that no ideology, no human power, and no pain could offer: the living presence of Jesus. And it's impossible to hear something like this without wondering, how many times has God also tried to speak to you in the midst of chaos, in loss, in moments when there seemed to be no way out? If this story touched your heart, if you felt something different while listening to each word, I want to invite you to check if you're already subscribed to the channel, leave a like so that more people can be reached by messages like this, and write in the comments, "I love Jesus." This is our way of publicly declaring that faith still conquers fear and truly transforms lives. And get ready, because the next testimony appearing on the screen is simply breathtaking. In it, a former Hamas radical recounts how a personal tragedy and Charlie Kirk's videos led him to meet the true Christ. A real, impactful, and emotional story. You need to watch it until the end. Click now and come with me to discover yet another living proof that when God decides to act, neither the past, nor pain, nor hatred can stop the power of transformation. Because where Jesus arrives, nothing remains the same.